The Iran
Let's try a
negotiations
diplomatic solution.
Up in
I
the
think
air.
it's going to fail. What happens next? I spent 4.5 hours with President Trump Friday. Here's what I think will happen next. If this deal fails, President Trump is going to take the Strait of Hormuz over. The United States will control the Strait of Hormuz. We'll charge a fee for all those who go through to pay for the operation. So to all the people listening, if this diplomatic effort fails, President Trump is going to take the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah. We're going to run it.
I don't think anyone expected Trump to say that, but there's more. Listen to this.
Hey, Peter, good morning. High-level diplomatic talks are taking place today in Switzerland aimed at solidifying the memorandum of understanding and entering into the next phase of negotiations. This comes as Iran's IRGC says they have closed the Strait of Hormuz. I spoke earlier with President Trump for more than 20 minutes, and he responded to that threat from the Iranians, saying that he spoke with Iranian officials overnight and told them, you close it and you won't have a country. He went on to say if they don't make a deal, we'll collect tolls. We may take over the strait if we have to. The president says the U.S. could become the guardian angel of the strait and the Middle East and take 20% of the oil. The strait, along with Iran's nuclear program, remain the focus for talks in Switzerland. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian spoke today from Tehran, laying out a new red line for the regime in this next round of discussions.
We will not give up our right to enrichment, and they, too, will be forced to accept it.
So once again, it sounds like these talks are at a stalemate. But did you hear the ultimatum from President Trump? Maybe the plan here is for this deal that very few people seem happy about, including the Iranians, to fail. Maybe that's the plan, so then the U.S. moves into the Strait of Hormuz on a long-term basis and makes money off it. That actually might be the case, because right here the New York Post reports that Trump is doing things that make Iran storm out of the negotiations for a deal everyone says he's begging for, but might not actually want.
Every video I've seen coming out of Switzerland has been utterly humiliating. We are the world's greatest superpower, and yet we have so obviously been brought to our knees. We are the ones who are showing up with this aura of desperation, such that they can tweet the most despicable things at us. We just destroyed their navy and their economy, and yet it's us who are showing up as if on bended knee, begging them to open the Strait of Hormuz.
I don't think that we are showing up on bended knee. I think when you see J.D. Vance get out there and say things are going great, you're seeing the good cop. And then Trump says, actually, we're just going to take over the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians don't know what to think. They're totally confused, which leaves them only one choice.
It was a very, very good day. We made a lot of good progress. We did exactly what we wanted to do, which is accomplish 4 things for the American people. First, we wanted to build a mechanism for keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. It is open. We've seen, of course, gas prices and oil prices come down.
True.
Millions and millions of barrels of crude and natural gas flowing through the Strait of Hormuz that weren't flowing before. But we also wanted to make sure that we actually set up the coordination mechanism so that we could demine the Straits of Hormuz, so that when there are the conflicts that inevitably come up, we can make sure we work through them rather than that leading to escalation. And that is exactly what we did yesterday.
Nobody wants escalation.
Number 2, we also wanted to build a mechanism, a similar mechanism, for deconfliction for the regional ceasefire. As the President of the United States has himself said, sometimes these ceasefires just mean you're shooting a little bit less, but we wanted to make sure that we had the proper coordination set up so that if there is shooting, if Hezbollah fires at Israel, or if Israel responds, if there are other conflicts that arise in the region, we're actually talking to each other and figuring out how to stop the shooting, how to make the region safer, our allies and everybody else.
That's a good result. Yet some people want to see Trump go back to full military action for reasons that don't actually exist anymore. Listen.
He tells us this is about regime change, unconditional surrender, eliminate the nuclear threat, and eliminate their missile capability. That's what he tells us. He then does 5 weeks of war, less than what the Pentagon wanted him to do, and then he stops. And he stops and fills the air with a whole bunch of empty threats about when he's going to restart. Then he gets to the point where the Iranians have him in a corner because of the economic calamity that's caused by something that apparently his geniuses in his national security team didn't anticipate, that they would close the Strait of Hormuz. How they didn't anticipate that, John, I don't know.
So depending on who you listen to, the United States has lost. Our country has crumbled and is failing. And the Strait of Hormuz nightmare will only get worse. Even though I just paid 30 cents less for gas this weekend than I did a week ago. And this idea that Iran is going to close the Strait of Hormuz, how are they going to do that? Trump just said we might be the ones that actually end up closing it, which would be the last thing this regime wants. And we've got geniuses telling us that it's time to go back to military action. We've already been told that Iran is 30 years back in time as far as their military is concerned. What are we trying to get to 35 years? We trying to get to 40 years? Like, at what point do you stop?
Disaster, and not just on the Iran front. It's a disaster on the global stage. I mean, what message do you think this sends to China? That we can be so easily brought down after such a phenomenal military success.
Now he has to make a deal because he feels the economy in the United States crumbling beneath him. And what's he do? He gives them the option of opening or closing the Strait of Hormuz based upon their interpretation. He gives them a $300 billion bribe offer. On top of it, he doesn't prevent them from charging service fees.
So actually, Trump has said there will be zero tolls in the Strait of Hormuz during the ceasefire and also after that. So I don't know where these people are getting their information that the United States has capitulated and failed.
You all know what the so-called president of the United States was saying. He had made a complete 100-degree turn.
President.
He was saying that Iran must surrender unconditionally.
Yep.
Iran has no right to do this. It has no right to do that.
President Trump responded directly to Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, saying he better watch his mouth, he better shape up, or we'll take over the rest of the country.
Yep.
The
there it is.
also-
Right, so it's the United States that's saying, hey, look, abide by this peaceful solution, or the United States will have to do more. The United States will take over areas of Iran. The United States will take over the Strait of Hormuz. This is the opposite of what the people who say America has failed, who live inside of America, are telling us.
But what we told the Iranians yesterday is when you guys engage in what us millennials might call trash talk, you can't expect the President of the United States not to respond and not to correct the record. So when they say things that aren't true, the President is going to respond to it. I'm going to respond to it. Americans are going to respond to it. When they make threats that aren't rooted in reality, they have to accept that the President of the United States is actually going to set the record straight.
Believes.
That's all that happened. So yes, there was a little bit of threatening, there was a little bit of whining, but at the end of the day, the talks continued and we made great progress.
So progress is happening in spite of what people say. People say, oh, Trump's failing. Trump's looking for an escape route. He doesn't have a plan. But these are people like Chris Christie and Mike Pence who don't know what's going on. These are people, they say, oh, the Pentagon told Trump what to do and he ignored that. Like, how would they know such a thing? They're not in the White House. They're not even close to the White House. Thank God people who want to see nonstop war are not close to the White House right now. And what would be the point of military action if Iran does not have the military ability to resist the United States occupying the Strait of Hormuz and charging its own toll? That's a money-making operation. That's not a war.
I think what the president posted and Trey just referenced on Truth Social this morning, they've got to pull back Hezbollah and they've got to open the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I'm not one who put any faith in this MOU anyway, Peter. I think it's a letter of intent in real estate terms. Doesn't bind anyone. You might continue talking, but they're not going to bring back Munich in 1938 from Switzerland. I don't think the vice president's going to do that. I don't think special envoys Witkoff or Kushner are going to do that. I don't think the president will let them do that. So I actually believe we're in halftime of the battle, the current battle. Tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary of Operation Midnight Hammer, when the president ordered the Fodor facility completely destroyed. And in that year, we've seen Iran terribly shaken. I think they're going to want to strike a nicer tone with everyone if they want to get out of this jam, because their country's fallen apart. They may have closed the strait again. That will not lead to anything productive for them, but probably a return to bombing.
And at the exact same time, they don't have the ability to do that. They can say whatever they want, but there's a U.S. blockade of this entire region, and they do not have the Navy or the forces necessary to even do something like that. So they can say, oh, we've closed the Strait of Hormuz, but it is a meaningless statement at this point. And Lindsey Graham, who apparently spent 4 hours with the president, says these talks will fail, which could mean that the future occupation of the Strait of Hormuz by the U.S. has been the plan all along. He says that the president says it will be seized, which is insane when you think about the fact that this entire time we've been hearing about a deal that could be a good deal for Iran if they want to abide by it, but ends up not being a good deal for them because they apparently do not want to give up some of their ambitions and they still want to strike a militant tone, which is not good for their neighbors. It's not good for their own people who are in a country that is economically falling apart. If the United States did take control of the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's economy, as the president has just threatened, who do you think that's going to benefit? That will be better for the people of Iran than their generals and their leaders continuing to wage this campaign against what is now the entire world economy at this point, which they don't even have the ability to keep doing, which could mean that this deal that people like Chris Christie think is an abomination failing will make them happy while giving the United States a relatively peaceful solution to this whole debacle, which will free up shipping permanently in this area while being some sort of money-making operation at the exact same time. Trump could be running a business here with the U.S. military.
And Hugh, nobody knows that is watching this, but I was waiting in Switzerland for the vice president this week, and he stood me up because we figured at the time this is just like a no-win situation for Vance, right? If the deal works, conservatives are mad that he's the face of it. If it doesn't work, the president is mad. But the VP's new angle in this new sound that we have, it sounds like he is arguing if this doesn't work out, it's really Israel's fault. Listen to this.
It's going to be something we're just going to have to continuously manage to ensure that, Israel and Lebanon are both safe and secure. The big problem is that you have somebody will shoot and then somebody will respond, and you kind of have a chicken and egg problem where you just got to stop the siege for long enough to get the ceasefire to hold.
So is that a fair point that really, if this all blows up, it's the Israelis?
No, and I didn't hear it that way. I heard the chicken and egg, which is not a great analogy because Israel had to go in and defend Israel's territory. The president has blessed that. I think the vice president I hope he's studying Ronald Reagan in Reykjavik in 1986 because sometime a disaster of a summit can turn into a big geostrategic political win. So if he walks away from Switzerland and said, these are idiots, these are lunatics, we can't deal with them, I think that increases his stock because that's the actual truth.
What he's saying is that what he's saying here is that this deal and these talks falling apart and imploding is actually going to benefit J.D. Vance. And as we heard, President Trump has a plan President Trump has a plan to take over the Strait of Hormuz after the talks fail and start charging a toll, which is going to mean the occupation pays for itself while freeing up global oil supplies. Heading into a midterm election year where the level of gas prices very well may determine how people decide to vote. And if that drops because of an operation like this, and there's no bad deal on the table that everybody disagrees with because Vance never agreed to anything and left Switzerland saying, oh, this didn't work out. How does this all implode on Trump again? I don't understand.
The president has said, as Secretary Rubio has said. So I think it could blow up, and to his advantage. What isn't to his advantage is blaming our closest ally, most important ally in the world, Israel, for any of this, because it's not their fault.
And it seems like the heart of Republican and Democratic concerns with this deal is giving Iran money that they can maybe then use for anything. I asked President Trump about that on Wednesday in Evian.
No one's giving them money.
The United States is not going to directly pay Iran, but the U.S. is going to let the Iranians start making billions of dollars, selling oil, accessing this reconstruction fund.
Only if they're doing things right. Only if, Peter, we're not doing anything. We're not putting up money.
Explain, though, what the difference is between giving Iran U.S. dollars and unfreezing U.S. dollars.
Well, the unfreezing is an easy one to answer. We have taken a lot of their money, and we have their money. We have taken their money. It's not our money. It's their money.
And you have to give it back at some point. You can't freeze the assets of another country that were already theirs and then say we're never going to give that back. And if we give that back to you, it's the same as the U.S. writing a check. No, that's not how it works. And if you do something like that, there goes our banking system. There goes our currency. If you're going to start stealing from other countries, that's a real problem. And it's an easy problem to figure out that you don't trigger by doing something like this. This is why when assets are seized, they're eventually unfrozen. So America's not paying Iran. America's not writing a check for anything. And as we just heard the president say, they will have access to investment opportunities from their allies if they do the right thing. If they don't, it sounds like a seizure of the Strait of Hormuz is now on the table for the first time by the United States. It sounds like a 20% takeover of Iran's oil is also being listed. That appears here on the screen, so that could happen while tolls are charged by the U.S. on Iran's ships in a strait of the world that they say that they have already closed and shut down. This really exposes what's really going on. If Iran does agree to the deal that's in front of them, that's fine. The deal wouldn't be on the table if they weren't going to agree to it. But the reason they're probably not is because giving up all the stuff that's in this deal means you can't be a regime anymore.
They are still in the area. There's still 2 Marine Expeditionary Units in the area. There's still thousands of troops from the 82nd Airborne still in the area. We still have more than 40 ships in the area. So all of that is, I love the Vice President's words that we're laying the foundation. And that's what the military is doing. They're providing that foundation, the space for that foundation to be constructed for a lasting agreement and deal.
All right, with what you know, with all the parties involved, it would take a military for whomever is going to control the Strait of Hormuz. You hear talk of this now. General Keane says it has to. We've got to figure out who that's going to be. Who, in your estimation, could it be?
You know what? I think that it can be anybody except the Iranians. And the Iranians do not control the straits right now. You know, they keep announcing that they're closed every few days. The insurance companies are enabling ships to not pass through. But CENTCOM's reporting that more than 70 ships passed through this weekend. So technically, the United States is already controlling the Straits of Hormuz because we're letting ships through that are not related to Iran's economy.
What if this entire negotiation with Vance over there in Switzerland is designed to fail, because then what ends up happening is the United States does not have a deal on its hands that people in the United States running the United States might not actually be happy with, and the failure of that deal allows the status quo that is in place now, the U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the anybody but Iran blockade, to continue. And then what if Trump comes along and says, hey, we're gonna keep this blockade in place, and we need to keep oil prices and to keep the global economy working in a reasonable manner, and because nobody wants to help us, we have to charge a toll to do this to make it sustainable. That would be the fastest way to get the United States out of this, because all of these NATO allies that don't want to come along and do anything, who've said that this isn't their strait, this isn't their problem, well, they would then want to commit forces to this area of the world or pay the United States to stay here and keep this whole thing open. Remember, Iran does not have the ability to threaten whatever the U.S. military decides to do over here. So if the U.S. decides that they want to do this because the talks didn't work out, that could be the agenda. That could be the end game, even though it doesn't look like it.
Well, Iran traveled to the first round of talks with a big group from all parts of their government, we're told. Some are saying that it was to send a message to U.S. negotiators. What that would be, we don't know. Iran has not only sent diplomats, it has sent the foreign ministry, the Secretary of State, the central bank, legal affairs, and oil. This is a whole regime delegation built around implementation, money, leverage, and red lines.
Yet Trump's the one begging for a deal. Yet Trump's the one that has no plan. Their entire government came to this thing. If they were just playing games, why would they bother sending their whole government over to this thing? That doesn't make sense.
It impresses me that this may be the first time that many of these elements of the Iranian government have been in the same room together. And so it shows that they're getting some sort of control, even if they have to go to Switzerland to make sure that all of their voices are heard. And that's what we want in a government. We want all of the voices heard.
All right, this just in breaking news word that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is said to be going to the Middle East. We don't have a timing on that yet, but what's your reaction? Why might that be?
Make sure a deal happens.
I think there's a couple reasons that might be. One is the Iranians are seriously considering, this agreement and making it. I love that the International Atomic Energy Commission is coming in to inspect. So Secretary Rubio may be going to meet his counterpart in a display of agreement, or it may also be to go, no, we are really serious, and this is your last warning.
I think only time's going to tell. If the entire Iranian government is in one room and is at these peace talks and everybody's there, that means something can actually happen. That means there's nobody to go back and check with. Remember, that's been a problem during this entire ceasefire. There were people who would come to some sort of negotiation and then say, oh, I don't have any power. I got to check with so-and-so who's over here. Well, now so-and-so and so-and-so. Now everybody's together. Now something could actually happen, which would be great, because that would mean Iran is abiding to the terms of a deal, which is a great deal if they obey it. And if they don't want to obey it, well, it sounds like the president has thrown down an ultimatum that might actually suit the purposes of world peace and a functioning world economy. What do you think? See you in the next video.